devotion.
Go to the festival.
Into the woods without regret, the choice is made, the task is set. Into the woods but not forgetting why I'm on this journey. Into the woods to get my wish, I don't care how the time's now. Into the woods
To sell the cow.
to the woods to get the money.
To the woods to lift the spell.
Make the
So, welcome to Reclaiming the Theatrical Canon, and yay, I spelled it correctly this time, for Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim and the book by James Lapine. The reason why we are doing this is primarily to open up the dialogue for individuals to learn how you can do different shows and bring different genres of people into a room and bring that history into the room and just kind of break down the thought process of how things can be cast. And with us today, we have Shamika Renee, Stephen Siddick, Jeremy Jackson, Alyssa Rossman, Temple Fortson, Elizabeth Lucas, and TJ Lucasina. And y'all are free to say more about yourselves as you go along, but also we have today your chat leads are Shamika and Stefan. And I have one other thing I want to do before I turn it over. Into the Woods, and I will be the first one to say, not my favorite musical, so y'all can beat me up later about that, but Into the Woods, but not too fast. Or What You Wish You Lose at Last. And that's about as far as I can get without realizing what the rest of it is. But Into the Woods, but mind the past. Into the Woods, but mind the future. And with that, we will go into changing this future. And I'm going to stop share and let y'all take over.
Thank you, Ricky. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm glad that you started with a quote or a lyric of Sondheim's from the show, because I think that's really the strongest, to me anyway, part of the show. Into the woods we go again. We have to every now and then. Into the woods, no telling when. Be ready for the journey. There's another little quatrain or whatever you want to call it. So I was thinking, you asked me to put some thoughts together about what I think about Into the Woods in terms of where are we now in 2021 versus when the show first opened on Broadway in 1988. Full confession, I saw the show, the original production in 1988 on Broadway. I was a teenager. My father took me to see 3 shows that weekend, and one of them was Into the Woods. One of the things I want to just straight off the bat talk about is the character of the witch. Because to me, it was historic in 1988 that Felicia Rashad replaced Bernadette Peters in that role. And so I wish I had been in the casting room or in the producer's room, office, wherever, when someone said, hey, how about Felicia Rashad for The Witch? And to see what everyone's face was going to do. Of course, Felicia Rashad was a huge star at that point on television from The Cosby Show. So, but it is really a historic moment in musical theater history because you have an African-American woman playing a lead in a musical that wasn't necessarily written for any particular race. And that role was not written for an African-American woman per se. And yet, when you listen to the lyrics that the witch sings, and if you interpret the witch, she is the outsider in the show. She is the one that is warning other people in the community about problems. She is the one, if you listen to Last Midnight, I'm the witch, you're the world. I'm the witch or the hitch, I'm what no one believes. I'm the witch, you're all liars and thieves like your father, and your son will be too, oh, why bother? You will do what you do. So in a way, the witch, whoever made that decision said, I'm going to put Felicia Rashad in this role, see what happens. That was brilliant. So I think there is room in Into the Woods, and I'll shut up now, for race to play a part. I don't think it's inherent in the play. I don't think the musical was written with that in mind. But as we've seen with various productions that Ricky highlighted and all of you have seen or been a part of, race can become an issue. I keep thinking about the mothers of all the young men who have suffered or died in the hands of the police in the last century or so. The witch in that context takes on, you know, I'm going to leave because you all aren't listening to me and everything I'm telling you, and you're the fools, and I've got information. I'm telling you what's going on. And also her care for her child is the key thing in that show. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot more to say, but I want other people to say it. Shamika, I want to pass it over to you first. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you, Ricky, for having me. As you can see, I love fairy tales. I've actually had the honor of being in a version of Into the Woods that had a lot of BIPOC cast members in it, and it was beautifully done. And I've always loved fairy tales for the whimsy, for the fantasy, for the costuming, clearly, but also because it's a fairy tale. So it can be anybody. Anybody can embody it. And I actually prepared a very small 12-second, I promise, video that shows some beauty that has perhaps not been considered by mainstream, that can be utilized as inspiration for designing for Into the Woods. The show, like I said, the show that I was a part of was very BIPOC oriented. I played Sleeping Beauty, as you can see by the spinning wheel, one of my favorite characters. And so I just want to share this really quick video with all of you to show there's more than just the Germanic original fairy tales or the Grimm's Brother fairy tales. Fairy tales can be for everyone.
Don't forget to share sound.
I did.
Okay. I think that was less than 12 seconds.
It said 12 seconds on the video itself. And I do have to give credit. I did take those photos from the BuzzFeed version of beautiful African-American children portraying fairy tale characters. And the photographer was Karen Baroncourt. She was the photographer. So I do want to give credit for those lovely images of those young ladies at the beginning of the video. And the final photo was, of course, from Cinderella, which is now on Disney Plus, starring Brandy Norwood and the late Whitney Houston. And as we saw from that photo, Prince Charming was played by an Asian young man. The queen was Whoopi Goldberg. The king was, I forget his name, but I love him so much. But he's a very wonderful actor who I've seen in The Flash and other presentations. But it's to show that fairy tales are for everyone. Yes, the Grimm's brothers made many of them famous, Hans Christian Andersen with Little Mermaid. But just because we are used to seeing fairy tale characters presented in a specific light because they are set in various places in Europe, there are people of color in various places of Europe as well. And we can expand that image and that vision when we produce those shows now. I mean, just the image of, can you imagine a Rapunzel with locks that are interwoven and braided and so strong to be able to carry the weight of someone climbing up the tower to rescue her? And so that is my heart people ask me all the time, what is your favorite fandom? Fairy tales. I'm not just a Disney fan. I am a fairy tale fan. And fairy tales are for everyone because they're not real. They're imaginary. It's about magic and lore and fairies and beauty and twinkling lights. And why does it have to be just for one group of people? It should be for everyone. And that is my stance on Into the Woods.
So I have a question from the Peanut Gallery. And anyone can answer this. Actually, anyone but Stefan or Shamika for this one. Into the Woods, of course, the characters are from fairy tales, which only exist in descriptive writing. There's never been anything said that this one has to be this race or this sexuality or whatever. So we see the characters in our heads if they've been drawn and depicted in illustrations in movies over the years. How can we reimagine their look and style? And do they have to match the old illustrations etched into our brains? Anyone can jump in.
Everyone's shy, and I'm not. So go ahead, start. Because there were a few questions there, Ricky.
Yeah, there was a few.
Well, first of all, fairy tales, as Shamika and Stefan have already pointed out, they don't require race to be a part of the story. But the cool thing about fairy tales in general is almost every fairy tale is a life lesson story. So the life lesson you want to teach can be shaped by the way you cast it. And so you do have the option to cast with BIPOC characters or cast, in my case, I was cast as the mother of a transgender Jack, who was Caucasian. And it never came up, it never mattered. Like our witch was Asian, it just, because we were telling a story that didn't focus necessarily on racial issues, it focused on family, it focused on bravery, it focused on right and wrong and learning good and bad and learning how to be fair and honest. And those things supersede any kind of racial divides or racial ways of thinking. And I think Into the Woods is great for that. One of that reasons that I will admit I'm the opposite of Ricky. It is one of my all-time favorite shows and has been since I saw it on PBS when I was in high school, and my whole world went like that because I love this show. But I love the thing about Into the Woods specifically is it also takes our fairy tales and it then completely turns them on their heads, and they don't necessarily have happy endings, and they don't necessarily work out the way we were told happily ever after. The marriages don't necessarily work out after the ball ends, and that's real. And I think with that in mind, casting Into the Woods with a variety of races and sizes and shapes and colors and backgrounds makes sense because it's supposed to be the world. And that is the world. So that's kind of my take on Into the Woods.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah.
So I'll just introduce myself real quickly. I'm a music director. I got to music direct Into the Woods in 2014, I guess, at Next Stop, and I was slated to do it at Creative Cauldron spring of 20, which obviously we didn't do, but we're hoping for spring of 22. So I also, Temple, adore this show. It's one of my favorites. But what's so interesting to me listening to this conversation, listening to Shamika and Temple, is that I love this show in spite of the fact that it's fairy tales, because I am not a fairy tale person. But to me, I love this show because everything about these characters is so real, right? The infertility and the loss and the struggles, and it's universal. This show is absolutely universal. And exactly what you said, Temple, it's everybody's story, right? Depending on how you cast it, it can be informed different ways. But I just think it's so interesting that the different windows that we have into it, that it can be for people who love fairy tales, or like for people who really just kind of get past the fairy tale part. I just think that's just part of the brilliance of this show, and the way it can tell all these different stories that are universal. And yeah, I love talking to. I could talk about this all night. This is so fun. Thank you for having me, Ricky.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to jump in? Elizabeth?
Sure. I sent you a picture of a whole bunch of different Cinderella,
Yes.
and the point of that picture is not that a whole bunch of different artists drew Cinderella in different cultures, but that the story of Cinderella has its origins in pretty much every culture around the world. And that's what's so brilliant about most fairy tales. I mean, there are giants in every folk tradition everywhere. There are witches in every folk tradition everywhere. So to say that these are based on Germanic versions, well, maybe, sorta, but these fairy tales are so much older than that, and they are so resonant in really everyone. I mean, I spent a bit of time just loving comparative folklore and reading, the same fairy tale in different cultures and seeing, oh, well, they foreground this and they background this, but it's still the same themes. And I know that one of the books that the writers of Into the Woods spent some time on is a piece called Uses of Enchantment. And the Uses of Enchantment is a psychoanalysis of fairy tales, and it really goes deep into, well, what does the stepmother mean? It's this transition for a child when their mother, who is nurturing, starts asking them to do things, and the disassociation that turns a mother into a stepmother figure. It gets very heady and psychoanalytical, and it's like that's universal. That's not about any one culture. So I love these images and just how different the images are, and how culturally based they are. But I mean, the idea of a less favored daughter in a family doesn't belong to any one culture. So I think there's tons of room if one had the budget, which I hope for my next production. But but if one had the budget to really kind of explore and lean into different cultures and go all the way with costumes and looks and casting that really make it resident on many levels and in many cultures. That's one of the things I love most about the show, really, is that sky's the limit on how you cast it and how you design it, and it's still going to resonate.
So, Elizabeth, based on what you just said, and for those of you watching this, yes, I am the voice behind the screen that you're looking at. Why do you think that when out of the 4 times that I have seen the show, not including the one that TJ did, there's always been a situation of almost typecasting in terms of the ones that I've seen, the witch was either a person of color was the stepsister or the witch. They were always the evil characters. And it's not just with Into the Woods, but specifically with Into the Woods. What do you think is causing that type of casting in terms of creating that negative association with person of color, evil character?
I can only speak for myself on that. I mean, I've always tried to practice color conscious casting, and that means if I have the perfect person of color for the bad guy, you can bet there's going to be a person of color elsewhere who's balancing it as a good person. I mean, I'm not comfortable with that. I think it's very interesting, the idea of Felicia Rashad as the witch, and the fact that is an outsider role, and that she does bring such wisdom and outsiderness to that particular character. I can kind of see that, but it still makes me uncomfortable. If it's not about race, I try really hard to make sure that I'm not casting it in a way that turns it into being about race.
Okay, good. Jeremy?
I was just going to say that I think maybe in the beginning, when people of color were first trying to break in to different areas of theater, that was one way that you kind of could break in, was to play the villain, because people sometimes, yes, there was the disparity of associating being a person of color with being a villain on the one hand, but on the other hand, some of the characters were very complex, and some of the directors had an easier time of letting that character go, as opposed of, oh, I'm not gonna cast a person of color in the heroine role. But then that was kind of a backdoor way to start kind of edging in there to be able to be cast in these other productions. So I think at first, from my view, from what I saw, it seemed like a way to get in, and also a way to play an interesting character that had, was multi-layered. But I don't know if anybody saw the Ford's Theater production of Into the Woods that just happened recently, but it was so good in my opinion. I thought that they played with a lot of things. They played with gender, they played with color, they played with, breaking down different stereotypes, and it was so beautiful. And I think I don't want to say too much because everybody has said pretty much everything that, I think is relevant and what really needs to be said, but just that, that's the great thing. I think that's why so many people love Into the Woods, is because you can plug in all these different people and types and everything else, and the audience will go there because it's a fairy tale, So now, of course, we need to start working on real life, besides fairy tales. So I'm sorry, Stefan.
No, not at all. You were still talking. Go ahead.
That was it.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, I might be the lone voice on the panel, but I very much think the witch is not a villain. I very much think the witch is one of the most interesting. Well, no, I'm just not you. I'm not responding necessarily to you. I'm responding to just the question that Ricky posed. I think the witch is perhaps the most interesting character in the show. We go into the woods to solve our problems, and the witch is the one that's sort of controlling the entire thing, right? So, from an aspect of power, she is the one with the power through the entire show until the very end. And even when she, may not be right, the end justifies the beans, or whatever, like the baker's wife says, right? But even though she's not the baker's wife and she's not Cinderella, she's still a key figure. And if we look at what we interpret as villains, I think Into the Woods is really the beginning of what we saw recently with Hamilton. You don't have Hamilton without Felicia Rashad being cast in Into the Woods.
Exactly.
And if you look at even Hamilton today, we think we're so advanced. We think we're so advanced and progressed today that we wouldn't do, make the villain African American, and yet Aaron Burr in Hamilton is played by Leslie Odom Jr. So if you want, it's like looking at Hamilton and saying that Aaron Burr is the villain. To me, it's the similar thing. It's not. He's not the villain. It's just a different side of the story. And so just because the character was cast with someone of color, let's not assume that that's the villain necessarily either. So I think that turns the audience's perception also on their head and makes them really think. It's interesting. I think it's very, very fascinating.
I think it's a person who's elevated, right? Like you, Stefan, you've been in theater. I think if you have an elevated sense of artistry and intelligence, you get that. But I think sometimes people just coming to the theater, that's why it's important, like what Elizabeth was saying, that her personally, if she's going to cast somebody as a villain, she's dang sure going to have somebody not a villain, right? Because I hate to say we can't always trust the intelligence of the audience, but sometimes, if you leave it up to them,
sometimes you have to spell it out.
Yeah.
I can defend the audience a little bit here, not because I think that they're smarter, but because I think the casting that is done this way, where you have the darker toned people as the villains. A lot of times I think it is done subconsciously. I think that a lot of casting directors, I think a lot of directors, especially unfortunately in community theater, they go with what they quote unquote know. So their brains, they don't necessarily go out to say, I want to cast the Black people as villains, or all the Asian people will be villains. They go into it going, I want to cast these people the way I see it because I see it this way. And they don't take the time to know themselves or know enough about their subconscious leanings to realize what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have for the future, is not just being able to cast more openly, because I think there are some people that be like, oh, well, it's trendy now, so let me just cast openly. That don't understand why they're doing it. They don't understand why it's important. They're just doing it because people expect them to right now. So they're not thinking fully. They're not embracing, they're not taking themselves out of it a little bit. They're just going, in some cases, I know this because I had a conversation with someone, well, they did it on Broadway this way, so that's the way it should be done. To which I would often say, okay, but Broadway will be the first to cross cast before you will. Les Mis cross cast immediately with Melba Moore. Chicago cross cast with Melba Moore. Into the Woods cross cast with Felicia Rashad. I can't even tell you how many people have done Belle that were not Caucasian. So Broadway will do it faster than community theater. I think
That's true.
they're just very narrow-minded, but not in that like, oh, I'm so narrow-minded, in that I just don't think for myself and I just go with what I already know. And I think that's our biggest challenge, is getting past ourselves for a minute. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. That's why I posted when I created the slide, because I'm aware of Felicia Rashad, I'm aware of Vanessa Williams, and showing that balance of the young heroines who are often overlooked and cast European, for lack of a better choice of terms. And so that's why I wanted to highlight those beautiful images of those beautiful young women who are portraying characters that are traditionally not seen as members of the BIPOC community, especially Snow White, because of her name and because of the lore behind how she got her name. But I really love the idea of a Rapunzel with braids or locks, and just that strength of her hair, especially as a commentary to modern society, where women of color are often criticized for our natural hair not being seen as professional. And so just really looking at the strength of it, and the beauty of it, and how intricate it can be manipulated to create this ladder that this young person could climb up to rescue her from her situation of peril, her situation of being kidnapped by this person who is manipulating her mind and making her think one thing that is not exactly the truth. And so in reference to the idea of women or people of color being cast as the villains, which are not always the villains, they just have a different side of the story. That is why I wanted to highlight young people of color being cast as the heroes. And that is why the end of the slide, even though it was very quick, said, and they all performed happily ever after. And I had it, cast the best cast, because we really need to look at people's talent and not their outward appearance for what is seen as traditionally aesthetically pleasing, or the typecast of what the norm is. We need to get past the girl next door look or the dashing hero look. We need to cast the people who are reading the best, who are projecting the best, who are emoting the best, and then reshape our vision as directors, producers, designers, audience goers, as what we think is what the hero looks like, or the heroine looks like, or the whoever looks like. We need to cast people on their talent and reshape. Perhaps our hero is someone who is sitting in a wheelchair. That doesn't make them less heroic. It makes them differently heroic. We need to cast people based on their talent.
And I'm just gonna say that one of my heroes in a given situation was when I went to an audition for Little Shop of Horrors. And I was at the audition, and I was sitting there, and I was nervous and worried myself. And a person got up and sang the heck out of her song. And she was very different looking than the other, contestants who were going out for Audrey. I wasn't going out for Audrey, but she was not even going out for Audrey. She just went out for the show. And as I sat there and watched person after person, I was like, she should be Audrey, like hands down. She was so amazing. I was like, she should be Audrey. Now she wound up not being Audrey. But Temple, you should have been Audrey.
I saw that coming.
You knew I was going to say that. She should have been Audrey. It wasn't.
This was not the director's fault. The director would have cast me as Audrey. That was my fault.
Right. Because over time, people have been seeing themselves in little boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have killed that role.
For my current production, where this phenomenal performer, she's really great, and I would have considered her for Baker's Wife or Rapunzel or Cinderella. And she put in her form, I want to be considered for Rapunzel or Cinderella. And I had to email her back and say, would you take the Baker's Wife? Are you so interested in that? Which was, a much meatier role. And she's
I hope she said yes. Did she say yes?
Yeah, she wrote back and she's, oh, yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure. Okay. So we'll see. I mean, auditions aren't closed yet, but she's extremely high on the list. And it was just funny to see that self-limitation on that.
Yeah, it's what Shamika was saying. We have to stop self-limiting, and then have other people stop thinking with limits.
Right. We need to get out of the Disney vision mindset.
Yes. So here, some
Yeah,
things.
I just wanted to bring it up real quick
Good.
because I know Ricky will want me to.
You're breaking up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ricky.
No, go ahead. You got it.
Because my internet is unstable. That's what it says up there. I hope it's not a comment on my mental health. Okay. No, but I just wanted to bring up, because I know Ricky wants this too, and it was in the chat, and it's may not be seen by people or everyone, but I asked a question about realizing that the character of Cinderella sings in this pretty legit kind of way, and then the Baker's Wife is a more earthy kind of vocal, and then the witch has like all the vocal acrobatics. Do people sometimes have a prejudice that they're not even aware of? We're talking about subconscious prejudice, where Cinderella, probably let's cast someone who's like a legit soprano, and that person may not be Black. There's this, although there are a million wonderful, legit soprano Black women. But this brings me back to a production of Sweeney Todd that I saw in college, my first year of college at UVA, and this was in 1990. And Joanna was played by a beautiful Ghanaian woman who's still a good friend of mine named Rita Adeko. She had the most beautiful coloratura soprano voice I have ever heard. To this day, it's the best vocal Joanna and performance Joanna I've ever seen. But she was Black, like very African. In the audience, people laughed when all the references were made to her yellow hair that are written in the show. And I was mortified sitting in the audience thinking, how can people laugh when this woman has just given the most gorgeous, glorious vocal performance of this role that they will ever hear? And she was wonderful in the role. So how do you get past some things that are in the script, or can you change it? Do you write Sondheim? What do you do? I was so terrified. So I bring that up just because, and why so to the whole coloratura soprano thing with types, why does Joanna have to be white? There's, that vocal range can be very much in a Black woman or, man for that matter, for anyone. So I don't understand why. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
Yes,
I would like to jump in on that, Ricky, if I may.
Sure.
As a hairstylist and a makeup artist, if it's in the script and it is not allowed to be changed, then that is the job of the hair and makeup designer to find the hair pieces that are complementary to whoever has been cast to make it work. Because if it says in the script to mention yellow hair, blonde hair, whatever color hair, and it cannot be changed, if you've reached out and said, can we change this? And they say, absolutely not. There are shades of any color of hair that will work with any color of skin tone. It is the responsibility of the director and the hair and makeup designer to find those shades that are complementary of who has been cast, to make it not humorous, but to make it realistic. There are African tribes that are born with blonde hair, and I will challenge anybody to challenge me on that, because I will die on that hill.
I think TJ has something to say.
Yes, TJ, go ahead, please, before I get too militant on this in my garb.
To go on towards the subject of hair color, when I worked on Into the Woods Junior, and we were in a old renovated Rent-A-Center where we just had black screens up, and that set like thin cloth that separated the audience from the cast. And this was a youth production from age, I believe, 6 to 18. So my main concern, and I'm going to get to the hair in a minute, was that we needed to be able to keep the kids quiet backstage, which is no easy feat for little ones. So I changed my entire concept to set it in a kindergarten classroom, and we had the kids sit around the edge of the thrust stage, so they were there and partaking. Our Rapunzel was Latina, and she's got a beautiful voice, and I'd worked with her in the high school before, and we brought her in, and I didn't like the idea of wigging her. It didn't look right with her skin tone. What we could afford, I guess, is for wigs. So what I did was, because we were in this kindergarten setting, the cow had a cow backpack. We had a red cape, obviously, for Little Red. But what I decided was we would take a yellow blanket for Rapunzel, and she would treat that like Linus's blanket, and she always had it with her. So eventually the witch came and took that away from her when she cut it. So this kept the color for the importance of the story and the formula, but in a way that we could maintain like her true identity with a prop and using that instead of throwing on something that looks absolutely fake, just with a bad wig, with that kind of with the budget that we were allowed. So lots of fun stuff, and just changing the setting of where it is. So it might not have been a traditional woods, but we had we transitioned into the woods and had or the coloring book style trees that the kids were holding up and moving around. The what is it? The beanstalk came out of the little bean canisters on the teacher's desk. The teacher was the narrator telling the story to start off with. We brought them all in. So for that reason, you know, I mean, the color had nothing to do with the casting. And we have found creative solutions around what was dictated in the script.
And
But
that's
I'm the
beautiful.
person that wants to go back in time and watch this production.
Right? That part, Temple. I
Did you tape
applaud your
it? I'd like to
creativity
see this.
and making that
Legally, you
and
never
making
tape
it
anything.
work. That's amazing. And that is what we're talking about. Being creative, taking the original text in the script, and if you can't manipulate it and you can't alter the actual text, making it work for your situation, your cast, your production, so that it honors the original text, but also respects and honors your cast. And that is absolutely beautiful and glorious and what we are talking about. And mwah.
All right. I have 3 peanut gallery questions.
Who are they for, Ricky?
They're for anyone.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Glasses, adjust, read. This is very different. Okay. Misogyny is addressed in the princess story. There are gender themes throughout. What would it look like with a twist on the genders for Into the Woods?
It would look beautiful. It would be challenging, and it would be interesting, and it would throw the audience completely. And as someone who is intimately invested in the LGBTQIA plus community, it's an opportunity for those performers to really shine in roles that previously they would not have been considered for. And it's a matter of opening up the audience's eyes and fellow performers' eyes to see these wonderful performers as who they are, as performers, regardless of their outward appearance or their identity. It's a matter of casting who is best for the role, who is strongest for the role, and then having the designers create looks that will embrace who these performers are to make them comfortable and to bring the performances to life.
I have a colleague. I have a colleague who teaches at Theater VCU at the musical theater program. His name is Kikao Alvaro, and he's a good friend of mine. And he directed a production of Into the Woods there, where I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, if someone else saw it, I believe the actor playing the witch in that production was a transgender female student. And I believe that same student he also cast in Little Shop the year prior or after as Ronette, I believe, or Chiffon, I'm not sure, one of the two. And cast also a white woman as one of the other, as I think Crystal. So he really messed with all the expectations, right, in both of those shows. But in Into the Woods, he did that. So I agree with Shamika. There is room. It's a fairy tale, and I think it's wonderful to stretch the audience's imagination in as many different ways as you can, just like TJ's production did it in different ways on different things, stretching the location, stretching props, costumes, sets, defying their own expectations and making them stop and think is always, I think, a good thing.
I would, excuse me, I would just jump on this and caution how you would, when you go to switch up the genders and stuff throughout, you'd have to really look at the relationships between the characters, because I think you could get into some really problematic stuff occasionally. If you, for instance, off the top of my head, if you happen to cast the wolf as an openly gay actor, and you decided to gender swap Little Red into a boy, then you're kind of vilifying the gay aspect with pedophilia and marrying that, when that's not necessarily true. So as much as I love the idea of switching things, and I think it can work a lot of the times, I do think you need to be consciously thinking about the relationship of the characters and making sure that you're not going to hit a boundary or take a step that might cross into unsavory territory.
And I see your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You also occasionally run into rights issues. The licenses are written very specifically that you cannot change the gender of a character. Now, how you cast that character is a different thing, and how you costume them, there's some gray area there. But when you're looking at something like a Sondheim work, they're very, very specific that you cannot do.
That's right.
A lot of cross-gender casting, and for me that always comes back to, well, let's just write new stuff. And it's like right now we're at a conversation on gender that is so much more nuanced than it has been in the past, and so I think we're ripe now to have some new pieces written. I'm looking at Shayna Taub's As You Like It for the fall, and it's got gender fluidity all over it. It's a beautiful piece, and that's a recent piece. And the show Monumental did the
Head Over Heels.
Yeah, Head Over Heels. Thank you. Again, it's written in there, and it's welcomes it. And Into the Woods, yes, you have to look at those relationships. You also have to tread carefully around the licensing. So for whatever that's worth, again, I'm a new musicals kind of a girl. This is my first Sondheim I've ever directed, actually. So I'm excited about it and scared.
You're excited and scared.
What I'm really trying to build is to get to do new stuff and welcome those new voices to write things that are authentic. There's this interesting conversation going on with in the Asian American actor community right now about Miss Saigon. And it calls back to what we were saying earlier. When Miss Saigon came out, there had not been opportunities for Asians. And so suddenly you have this enormous cast of immensely talented Asians who are all playing prostitutes. And so it's like, okay, well, they took the opportunity because that was the opportunity, and yay, they got to be on Broadway. And now you have this incredible crop of people who are coming up saying, wait a minute, I'm just as talented. Why aren't I also getting to play other things? And so the conversation now is, should we even do Miss Saigon anymore? Even though it was groundbreaking at the time, it's not groundbreaking now, and it is in fact more of a drag on the conversation. So so we get a whole new crop of writers who are, Allegiance came out, which is, about Japanese internment camps, and stories coming out about, from alternate perspectives than the white male perspective.
I do want to say something about that, because this is a passion issue I have. First of all, Miss Saigon is one of my all-time favorite shows, and it's a show I know I'll never be in for a lot of reasons, or most likely would never be in. But I love Miss Saigon because musically it's one of my favorite shows. But I do believe there's a danger in just saying you can't do things anymore. I think instead of saying you can't do it, give more opportunity, create new, add to the canon. Like, you don't throw out all of the shows we've known our whole lives just because they don't fit into the current world of thinking necessarily, but you do come up with other shows. like
West Side Story. I mean, what would we do with West Side Story and things like that?
Right. It's called updating.
It's Romeo and Juliet. Like, it's a classic tale that's been told through time. You just use different races, different people, different fights, different enemies. Like the story is there. Miss Saigon is actually, you know, based on the true Vietnam War, so there's some issues there anyway. But I just think that the problem we have nowadays and what we're seeing a trend of is, instead of taking a chance on new material and bringing out more opportunities and doing more interesting things, they're going, let's do the movie, the musical, because we know the movie sold money and we don't want to risk anything ever because we have to make money. So we, you know, we're sorry, Asian community, but you're still stuck with Miss Saigon because we know it'll make money. Like, no, give them more. You know,
Right.
just create more. We are creatives. That is our job.
Exactly. And going back to what TJ was saying, my points before were as far as casting and not manipulating the characters themselves. But even with changing some, if you were to change some of the characters or if you were to gender swap some of the characters, in reference to the Big Bad Wolf himself, it's a little questionable if you really pay attention to his lyrics and who he's directing his attentions to, regardless of who Little Red is played by. I mean, there's some adult themes in there with the Big Bad Wolf. I'm just gonna leave it at that so we can keep this whole presentation PG-13. But there are
No, but
ways.
Shamika, I think I was thinking the same thing you're saying when TJ was talking is preying on a young girl. But if he's preying on a young boy, then that's some sort of perverse gay thing, which really says something about our society more than it does about either of the people involved.
And when predator is a predator, regardless of who they are preying on.
Right. And when they did do the Ford's version of it, I hate to harking back to that, but that's my last experience with it. It was 2019. They did have the stepmother was played by a man in the show. And that made a very interesting conversation. Yeah, I brought my kids and they, we were all pointing that out. Yeah. No, it was. I'm trying to remember.
I missed it.
I
saw it too.
I'm trying to remember who it was.
You know what?
How did I not clock the...
Well, I will tell you that I music directed right before Woods. I music directed Cinderella at Imagination Stage, and Evan Casey was our stepmother. And there was a big conversation about that because that's how it was a different version of Cinderella. And there was a big conversation about, and Evan's a genius, right? And can make any role amazing. And then went on to play the baker at Ford's. But there was a big conversation and the director made some really compelling arguments about why he had written this role as a man. And his arguments were around it being children's theater. And he wanted to make the character larger than life and to be less scary to kids. I'm not going to get the argument quite right, but it was compelling. And the staff at Imagination Stage, I have to give them a lot of credit, spent a lot of time really thinking it through. He played it as a man dressed as a woman.
You know what? Maybe I'm confusing the two because I think I did see that at Imagination Stage.
Did you see it?
It's
possible.
Alice
Alfeco was our Cinderella.
Because I have the article here for Ford, and I was like, as soon as we were done, I was like, I need to look up and make sure I have my facts straight. Because I do remember him. Right, I do remember him playing the stepmother, but maybe it was for Cinderella and not for Into the Woods.
Yeah.
So I need to check.
More of a Edna Turnblad type casting.
A little bit, yes. It was very much larger than life. Very much larger than life. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because maybe does Sondheim have rules? Does he have rules about the gender?
They can.
I don't know.
It gets into employment law. You cannot specify who does the job. But you can specify what the job is.
Yes, and Jay Jones was amazing.
Interesting. Jay Jones was amazing.
Very
agree.
Gender swap.
Always amazing.
But they cannot say anything about the actor.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Because I saw those productions pretty close to each other almost back to back.
They were.
And they were
Yeah.
overlapping with also characters. Like the actress, I think
Yes.
she was in Cinderella, but she was also in Into the Woods. So I may be
Yeah.
confusing the two productions. So
Yeah, because Awa Salseka was our Cinderella, and then she was the baker's wife.
there you go.
So
Yep.
yeah.
So
Oh, that's right. It was Maria Egler, TJ. That's right.
all my peeps. So one other question, and then we can kind of carry this out. And it's an odd question, but not an odd question. It's just a rather unique question. So the question is, since all the characters are considered flawed in some way in the story, and did I ask this already? Okay, no. Since the characters are considered flawed in some way in the story, is there anywhere that makes sense in the character story where one can address racism or an ism as that flaw?
Can you say that question one more time?
One more time.
I sure can. Again, from the Peanut Gallery, didn't write it, just reading it. Since all of the characters are considered flawed in some way in the story, is there anywhere that makes sense in the character story where we can address racism as that flaw or another ism as that flaw? Temple, your
I just
mouth
thought of
open.
one. Cindy. If Cindy is played by a Black character and her entire family, step family, looks down on her, that could easily bring up the conversation of they look down on her because of her color.
Especially because her name is actually Ella. Cinderella is a derogatory nickname,
right?
Because she sits by the cinders to keep warm, and so she is covered in soot. So if you were to cast the step family as anybody other than Black, and Ella as a Black performer, then that commentary could naturally come forth without altering the actual text. But people often forget that Cinderella is a derogatory nickname. Her actual name is Ella.
And it's also within the way the other people act too. So when you have the King's Guard looking down on her, when you have that, you can create subtle physicalities to reinforce that. Sorry, go ahead, next person.
You could also argue that the baker's wife and the prince in the woods, the prince has objects that he pursues, which are, Cinderella and Rapunzel, and, but then he runs across a peasant in the woods and it's just easy taken and moving right on. There's no there's no pursuit there. It's just there for the taking.
Dominance.
Power dynamic that's could lean into that.
Wow. Well, we've had a wonderful conversation this evening. And I love everything that was brought up. I love everything that was said. Y'all are making me like the show, and I dislike you for that.
Should have seen Jade. You would have. I'm telling you, if you had seen that Ford, you would have really.
I know what she can do. I've directed her before. She's amazing. But people do things with shows that make me start to like them. TJ made me like Sweeney Todd, and trust me, that was a lot. He actually made me love Sweeney Todd. I would actually do it and watch it again. Y'all have me now intrigued. Yes, you have me now intrigued for Into the Woods in a way to where I kind of like it now. So with that, what I want to do before we close, I just want to go, I'll call you one by one, and I just want you to tell me what Into the Woods means to you. So a message from you to everyone else about Into the Woods and how we can keep these conversations going and how you can use theater for social change, social justice, all that, good stuff. So I'm gonna start with Jeremy.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. I really want to take it back to what Stefan said in the beginning. How he was linking, Felicia Rashad having taken over the part, and just the way that turned some of the lyrics on its ear, and just the breadth of the possibilities of when you open the conversation to different perspectives and different cultures. And that's definitely something that we need to keep going, because why are we doing this, right? We're doing this so that, for growth and change, because when you walk into the theater and you sit down, you want to see your story, and you want to be able to affect change in the audience and how they view people, and you want to be able to go and enjoy a little part of yourself or something that you've imagined. So I think that's my statement, and that's why I continue to love this. And thank you so much for having me be a part of this discussion today.
Oh, you're welcome. Elizabeth.
I've got 3 things to say about why I put it on my season this summer. One is I love it, and I've never done Sondheim. It's about time to fix that. 2 is that it's comfort food. It's a show everybody knows. And I think we're at a point in our national psyche when familiarity is of value to us. And 3, and probably most important, is it's about a group of people who go through an enormous trauma where their world is crushed and they have to decide how they want to rebuild it. And that's where we are.
Wow, that's how you market that show, Elizabeth. That last statement, that's how you market that show, and that's how you get butts and seats. Point blank, don't use anything else but that last statement.
Great.
Alyssa.
For me, I always just come back to this show because for me, it's about family, and it's about sort of created family, and family can be whoever you want it to be, and kind of who you're standing with at the end. I mean, at the end, when it's, the 4 of them, and you just know that like they're gonna be okay, and they're gonna find a way to keep going, and into the woods you go again. You have to every now and then. And this show gets me every time, because I just think it can relate to any sort of thing we have to go through. Like Elizabeth just said, we've just been through this incredible, unimaginable national event, and the way we all emerge from it is different, and hopefully in some ways better, and with the people that are our family, and whatever that means. So that's why I always come back to this show. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Temple.
I have forgotten all of your questions by now. No. Well, I have 2 things. One, I come back to Into the Woods all the time, for me, definitely because it's comfort food. It's a show that makes me think about my mom and family, and that love is enduring. And I sing the songs when I'm upset and I just need some kind of musically, it's one of my favorite shows. It's so much fun to sing. But in terms of how to move on in the future with this show or any show, in terms of casting and all that kind of stuff, honestly, at this point, my biggest thing is just do it. For the love of God, just do it. Because the one thing that I go back to is when I was a teenager, it was unbelievably controversial. Matter of fact, I was older, college, Saved by the Bell. They had Lisa kiss Zach on the show, or almost kiss him, and they
kissed.
Killed the storyline right after that. It immediately disappeared. That was huge. And nowadays we're used to seeing interracial couples on TV because people started showing it. Television, movies, plays, if you start putting it in front of people, it will change minds, it will change lives, it'll change the way the world works. So at this point, we just need to do it.
Side note, they actually dated in real life, Temple.
I wondered if they did, actually. I thought they might have.
They did.
Yeah.
All right, TJ.
I keep going back to Into the Woods because there's power in the words. Um, there is power in watching the relationships because the show is accessible. I think on every level, you are able to see these relationships these characters have. You see them with the power they have of making the change that they need and moving forward. Um, and I think regardless of what your background is and where you come from, you're able to see the struggle and see how they persevere through it, even through the constant tragedies that happen in the second act. Nobody's really expecting the second act, and it comes along and hits you pretty hard. But you see, those who are left persevering and really going for it. And for me, that's always been why. It's the way the characters go uh, through through their tragedy and how they come out on the other side that make the story worth it. And when you're relating it to today, we are going through this tragedy, and we will get through it. And it's who you want on your side when you get through it on at the end of it. So yeah, I like it.
All right, I'm gonna go with Stefan.
Oh, okay. Well, everything everyone said, because I agree 100%. And it was wonderful to hear everyone's different views, and yet I agree with all of them. I want to just add a little bit of an additional thing to the idea of trauma and what happens in Act Two with the song "No One Is Alone" primarily. When the show came out in 1988, we were going through another very big pandemic that was killing hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world. That was the height of the AIDS epidemic. Different circumstances, but the death and the loss and the trauma were certainly there. And the Broadway community took up the song "No One Is Alone" and made it about, for AIDS relief and research and fundraising. There was even T-shirts made with a little AIDS ribbon and "No One Is Alone." I used to have one. So as a gay man of a certain age sitting in the audience in 1988, watching that, Act Two is, to me, the most interesting act of Into the Woods. It is the one where all the difficult choices have to be made and reality sinks in. So I agree with what was said by Elizabeth and about trauma. I think it's a smart idea to do the show now as we're heading out of this huge trauma ourselves, and to hark back to that previous trauma. So it's not just a BIPOC thing, it's also a LGBTQ plus thing in this case. So you can see it from a lot of different angles, I guess. So I really enjoyed the show for those reasons. So that's it.
Okay. And Shamika?
I wish
Oh, here we go.
I wish for peace and love, contentment, happiness, success, survival for all of us. I wish for peace in our turmoil dealing with this pandemic. I wish for peace in our uncertainty, in our career choices, especially those in the theater community who live their lives with theater. I wish for casting based upon talent and not solely on appearance. I wish for peace, and I wish for contentment. I wish for love. I wish for joy. And that is what this show signifies. It signifies the reality that we all must face, but it also signifies the beauty and the hope and the light and the magicalness of fairy tales. I wish.
So with that, I want to thank you all for joining me in this conversation. There will be many more. I hope you will come back and join. I love the different viewpoints, and I didn't even realize until I was looking at everyone speak. We have costuming, we have performance, we have direction, we have choreography, we have music. We have a production team talking about a show that, you know, coming from all different levels. And we have lighting, you know, TJ can light up there. We have everything.
Really.
So this is a show that can bring people together and can tell an amazing message. And I just want to thank you all for joining in.